Hello and welcome to the lecture for module number 2. Today we're going to talk about the camera. One of the things that I hope to communicate or get across this semester is the fact that we have to tune our eye to see like the camera, and then make sure we understand how the camera works so that we can make the camera operate as close to our eye as possible. So throughout the entire semester, you'll hear me back referring to how we tune the camera and how we set our expectations on what the camera is going to do in terms of a given lighting situation or a given composition or motion or something like that. Well, so this slide here is laughingly students say this is a picture of you out shooting. It's not. I probably have that much equipment, but I don't have Nikon and Canon. I just have Canon, and I don't have that many cool big lenses. I only have one. So where it could be me, it's not. But I do tend to have a lot of gear, and I am a little equipment rich. So in tuning our eye to give us what the camera sees, and then tuning the camera to see what we see, it's interesting to see the similarities between the eye and the camera. We have the back of the eye, right, where we have the rods and the cones. That's basically our sensor. It's on the retina. We have a lens right in here that basically changes its focal length to focus on near and far away objects. We have an aperture right here, the iris, that opens and closes depending on how much light there is. On a bright sunny day, you see that your pupil gets very small. And on a very dark day or at night, or when you go to the eye doctor and they dilate your pupil, they basically take this iris and open it up all the way. Okay, so it basically is an aperture like we have in the lens of our camera. And then we have this protective coating over here, the cornea, which helps to focus, and it also helps to protect the eye. We got the eyelid, the lens cap, blah, 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 blah. I guess most important is that all the information that's collected within the eye is sent to the optic nerve to the brain to be processed. So we have a bit of a more sophisticated processing to the image in the brain than we have in the camera. a more accurate interpolation of what we're seeing. So they can correct for a lot of things that the camera can't. I don't know if you've heard of a camera obscura or a pinhole camera. It's probably the simplest of all cameras. The Latin word camera means a room, and obscura means dark. So camera obscura, dark room, is what pinhole is. They call it camera obscura. Basically, if you take a box, put a small pinhole in it, make the box light tight, project light, point it at something bright, you'll see it imaged on that back surface. And if you put film on there or a sensor, then you obviously can record that image. Otherwise, if you had just some way to view it, you could see the image. You probably made these in school at one time or another, or it might be interesting to try for an experiment now. Probably the most simplest kind of camera is the view camera. Light's transmitted by the lens to, basically it's a dark room or container with a lens on one side, and on the other side there's ground glass or glass that's been sandblasted, so when light hits it you can actually see the image on the glass. It doesn't go right through it. And the ground glass is basically in the same place as the film would be once you put a piece of film in the camera. There's something called bellows that connects the ground glass and the lens together that expands and contracts for focusing and magnification, but also creates that light tight box. And basically, it's such a simple device. You point the camera at your subject. The image is projected onto the ground glass. You focus, you crop, you do all the creative work, the compositional work, and then basically put a piece of film in exactly where that glass is, and a little slide, and then you take the photograph. This is pretty much what it looks like, and as I said, these are the bellows right here. Here's a standard that holds the lens. Here's this rear standard, right, that holds the ground glass. As you're looking through the ground glass, you're seeing the image. So you're seeing exactly what the camera's taking. And then once you put the film in, cock the shutter, set the lens up, and then make the exposure, you basically can't see anything, because the film is going to go right in between the ground glass and the body of the camera. As you can see over here on this real picture of a camera, there's a little spring-loaded contraption right here that allows a film holder to slide into. So this is probably the simplest kind of camera. You can do a lot of perspective control with this camera. Still used a lot for product photography, and they just, instead of putting film on the back, they put a sensor on the back, either a scanner or a regular sensor. So it's still a popular kind of camera because of its movements it has. The front and the rear standards tilt and swing. You've heard of tilt shift lenses, maybe? Well, this is the ultimate tilt shift camera. You can tilt and shift the rear standard and the front standard to make those kind of interesting images that you may have seen from shift tilt photography. Check that out on a search engine and see what you find. There's some really interesting images that come from that. A twin lens reflex camera. So this is a camera that has two lenses. The focal lengths match, and they're right on top of each other. The top lens usually, almost always, is the focusing lens, focusing, composing, projecting onto a ground glass, much like the view camera. And then the bottom lens is the taking lens. So the top lens takes the light, right, almost the same view, not exactly, almost the same view, and routes the light up to a ground glass where you can see it, to focus, to crop, to frame, all that kind of stuff, and the bottom lens takes the picture. So when you do take the picture, you're never blind, because that bottom lens is the one that's pointing at the film, and you can see through the top lens at all times. Now, one of the drawbacks of this is that we have something called parallax. In some more expensive cameras, that's corrected. In other cameras, it's not. And all that means is that the taking lens and the shooting lens and the viewing lens are not the same. So at infinity, it's really not going to matter. But if you start getting close, you're going to see a little shift in what you see and what you get. Again, tuning our eye to expect what the camera is going to give us, and knowing what the camera does by the nature of its hardware, software, or other sorts of limitations it might have. Most of these cameras are fixed lenses, medium format, so an 80mm lens. Some Mamiyas have some interchangeable lenses, so you get a little bit of flexibility. It basically changes the top and the bottom lens in one little cassette so that they match. So here's a view of the Rolleiflex. A view of a Rolleiflex twin lens reflex camera. The top lens right here is the viewing lens. The light comes in here, hits this mirror at 45 degrees, and shoots up to the ground glass. This hood shields some extraneous light and gives us a little darkened area to look into, and we can see the image. Down here, when we're ready to take the picture, we basically click the shutter button. The shutter opens and closes. The light then transmits through the lens and hits the sensor of the film, depending on the kind of recording material you have in the camera. Most of these twin lens reflex cameras are film-based. Very few are digital. So film here because it's made basically a film camera. But a pretty popular camera for portraits. Good quality. You still can find a lot of these floating around if you want to shoot film. They're very quiet, very nice to handle, and give you superior image quality with that large 2¼ by 2¼ negative. A rangefinder camera is a camera with a viewfinder that's coupled with focusing. Parallax is usually corrected in these cameras. So as you focus, you see the image shifting in the viewfinder. Closer you'll see it move. Further away you'll see it also move. And focusing, you can focus. Now with the twin lens reflex, if you focus here, this is also in focus. With the twin lens reflex, we're looking through a window up here, and here's our lens. All right, so somehow we have to know when it's in focus. This isn't a lens, guys. This is just a window on the world that gives you about what the frame is for that particular lens. Okay, so for focusing, sometimes there's a double image that is connected with the lens to show you when it's in focus. Other times there's just a guess focus with how many feet you are away. But this is a really light, small camera. This is a Leica. Very expensive still. This Summicron 50mm f2 lens is about a $7,000 lens. So it's, as I was saying, it's a expensive little toy. So if you happen to have one of these in your attic, a nice brown leather case that says Leica on it, if you don't know what to do with it, you could bring it to the college and or send it to West Valley in care of Brian Tramontana. I'd be happy to take care of it for you. Right. So anyways, we have the viewfinder. So you're looking through the viewfinder, framing, making those compositional decisions, picking the moment to take the photograph. And then down here, sorry, hit these buttons by accident. Down here we have the subject coming through the lens and then going on to either the film or the sensor, depending on what's our recording media on the camera. Rangefinder cameras come with digital and film. A lot of digital cameras now have this rangefinder kind of mode. Some of the smaller, lighter, consumer-grade cameras are doing away with a viewfinder at all, completely, and just using live view in the back of the camera to frame. Right? It eliminates some extra parts, some extra pieces, and then you're actually seeing exactly what the lens is projecting. So it's not a bad compromise to get rid of the viewfinder. Although some people are kind of tied to this because you really can stabilize the camera much nicer when it's pressed up against your face and holding it out with your extended arms, kind of like a, I don't know, whatever. A single lens reflex. Now this is what we have in most of our DSLRs, digital single lens reflex camera. D, digital, S, single, L, lens, R, reflex. The image forming lens and the focusing lens are the same. Okay, we look through the taking lens to frame, to make our compositional decisions, and then once we want to make a photograph, that light is then diverted away from our eye and directly to the film or the sensor plane. Okay, so for the moment that we take the picture, we're blind. We don't see what we're taking. When we're seeing the picture, the light is then directed upward from the path of travel by a mirror, the same way with the twin lens reflex, puts it up into a ground glass. But then there's basically a pentaprism on top that flips that image laterally, left and right side up. So when we're looking through a single lens reflex, we're seeing the image right side up, left, right is correct, exactly the way we see the world, except with a frame. And then we go to take the picture, that's exactly what's going to end up on the recording media. Okay? So basically we're looking through that same lens. If we change lenses, we have a different view. Our eye has a different view, but so does the recording media. Wide angle, telephoto, something like that. So that's a single lens reflex. This pentaprism on top corrects the image so that it's laterally correct and right side up. And as I said, the moment we take the exposure, the mirror is retracted and the light goes to the film or the sensor. I mean, there's no parallax because we're looking through the same lens. So we would get the same thing as we would get, right? As if the film or the sensor in the film is going to get. So here's a cutaway version of that. When we're viewing the image, the subject light comes through the lens, hits the mirror, goes to the ground glass where we focus, right, the image. But then as it bounces through this mirror, it gets laterally reversed or corrected. So it's the mirror makes it right side up and the pentaprism laterally reverses it. So we see exactly what we would see with our eye without the camera. Once we go to make the exposure, the mirror then retracts, folds up, gets out of the way. The light then comes through the lens directly onto the film or sensor. Sorry about that. So I should turn my ringer off, shouldn't I? On my phone when I'm doing this. I do it in class. I don't know why I just don't do it here. So that's basically a cutaway of the single lens reflex camera. Here's a cutaway of a Nikon D3 with a standard probably 70 to or 2470 lens, something like that. And you can see its complexity. You can see the mirror, you can see the circuit boards, you can see all the optics. Pretty sophisticated bunch of machinery inside these small boxes that we kind of take for granted, sling over our shoulder and expect to make great pictures all the time. Just gives you an idea of some of the components that are involved. Now I'm going to go through the DSLR camera and some of the features and some of the buttons on the camera. I'm going to use a Nikon D3000 as our sort of model. This is the camera that we check out at school. Most cameras have at least these buttons on it and more. This is a low-end consumer camera, $500-600, standard 80. What is it? 18 to 55 kit lens, and a DSLR camera. Some of you I know are going to be using more automatic cameras. Some of you are going to be using your iPhone for the class. There's some controls on this camera that are going to help you with some of the assignments. So if you do have access to a DSLR, then I would recommend getting a hold of that, especially for the beginning few weeks of assignments where we're dealing with f-stop and shutter speed, because you really have the ability to control it very accurately with these cameras, and it's a little bit more difficult with some of the other cameras. These are also rentable at borrowlens.com. Great folks down there. You can pick up the lenses via mail or at Henry's shop downtown, Photo Express. They pick up and deliver from borrowlens.com. And they have every lens imaginable, every camera body imaginable, and you can rent it for a day, a week, a month, whatever you want to do. Okay? So that's a good local vendor that that supplies cameras and specialty items to the photographers and photography students before you may make the plunge into buying a camera. So basically, this is how the camera looks just sitting there. I'll explain some of the pieces here, and we'll be going over these probably a few times. We have our skylight filter, which we'll talk about later, that protects the end of the lens. For this lens, this is the focusing barrel, and this is the zoom barrel. This says 55. On the other side, it'd say 18. Okay? So as you turn this barrel, this knob, right, you see more or less of the image. It's a zoom lens. You zoom in or zoom out. Okay, it doesn't focus, it just changes your angle of view. Over here we have vibration reduction on off. I leave it on all the time. Focus, automatic or manual. Over here we have, you can enable the flash at any time. This is a special function button that you can assign something, and it's also got the self-timer button. Here's a button you'd press to remove the lens, which, unless you're changing lenses, there's no need to take the lens off this camera and look inside. Every time we do that, we get dust inside, and it just makes our pictures look horrible with these gray spots everywhere. I'm going to show you what the camera looks like inside on a slide. It's the truth. It's the lens taken off. You've seen it. It's done. Don't worry about it. Here's some other components, USB out and video out. On the other side is where the card slot is. A little closer up of these knobs, VR on and off, automatic and manual focus, and then again the thicker, wider knob here to change the focal length of the camera. On the other side of the camera, there's the 18 right, marker that we were talking about. We have the on and off button. After a certain amount of time, if the camera's on, it's going to shut itself down. You don't have to turn the camera off every time you stop using it, or you can. It just depends. Info button that gives you some info on the screen on the back. Here's the shutter button. This will give you plus minus exposure. It also works to change the aperture. Once you enable your finger down on here and turn this button, you can control the aperture. Here's a little wheel that allows you to control aperture or shutter speed. And I'll talk more about those as we move along, but that's an important knob to use. Some cameras have one on the front or back and one on the front, and they control those aperture and f-stop independently. This uses the same switch or the same wheel, but by pushing this button here, it shifts from shutter speed to f-stop. You can see that little f-stop marker right here. Here's your exposure mode dial. Some of these are on a dial on top of the camera. Some are in the little window over on the side. Some are only viewable in the back. Okay. Full auto, green square, it does everything. Flash, auto ISO, can't shoot RAW, JPEG, blah, blah, blah. It says, Brian, you know nothing about the camera. I'll do everything for you. And that might be a great mode to be in. It's kind of like your iPhone, right? Put the phone up at something, you hit the button, it does everything for you. It focuses, it changes the exposure, the flash goes off if it needs to, blah, 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 blah. Okay? What we're going to be doing, though, is not letting the camera just do whatever it wants, because sometimes it makes a mistake. And in tuning the camera to replicate what we see with our eye, it's really important to understand what it's doing and why it's doing it, and then be able to control those individual pieces to best match what we see. And once we can get over that hump, then all of a sudden photography gets really easy. But until we can understand the camera and understand its limitations, and then also understand our eye and its limitations, right? And then come to some meeting point between these two. Okay? These are the creative modes. Macro, sports, mountains, portrait. Disregard these. They don't mean anything. You can do the same thing by setting the camera. If you're shooting sports, you'll know how to set it after this class. If you're doing a landscape, you'll know how to set it. If you're doing a portrait, you'll know how to set it. It just makes some priorities on aperture and shutter speed based on what it thinks you're trying to photograph. Over here is a little bit more important. Manual, you set up everything. It will allow you to take a horrible picture. So the manual forces you to set the f-stop and the shutter speed. Aperture priority. You set the aperture and it picks the shutter speed to make the perfect exposure. Or so it thinks. S, shutter priority. You pick the shutter speed, it picks the f-stop to make the correct exposure. And program mode is just one step away from full auto. It controls f-stop and shutter speed, but it also allows you to shoot in RAW. The flash doesn't automatically go up. There's some other features that it disables depending on how you have the camera set up. Guide, I have no idea what this is for. I don't shoot with this camera. I should figure it out because it's there. But basically, in our assignments and the instruction that I'm going to be giving you, we're going to deal with M, A, S, and P, and almost all of your cameras, even the small rangefinder cameras or pocket cameras, give you the ability in some way to go into manual, aperture priority, or shutter priority, or a full auto mode. So we'll be talking about when you would use what mode and for why. This is really important too right here. This isn't with all cameras, but all DSLRs have a diopter adjustment. I know I wear glasses and I don't wear my glasses when I look through the viewfinder. So I have to set this to compensate for my eye because it's my near vision that focuses on the ground glass. If you don't wear glasses, you may want to make sure this is set so when you look through here, the writing in the viewfinder, the marks on the ground glass are sharp. Once those are sharp, then once the image comes in focus, you'll be able to recognize it. But this is a really important button for you to be aware of when you're setting up a camera. Over here is a little wheel for cycling through different menu items, trash can for throwing away pictures in the field. I would recommend not doing that. Better to get home, look at the images. If you want to delete them, fine. But deleting them when you're out shooting, you can end up making a mistake that you may regret in the future. Here's a little door for the SD cards for these cameras and the battery. These batteries are pretty good. They'll last almost a day of shooting. If I go somewhere, I bring the charger with me, so if I pop into a restaurant for lunch or dinner, I could pop the battery on charger on and just get it topped off to make sure If this was your own camera and you were buying one of these cameras, I would highly recommend buying 2 batteries, just so you have a spare you can pop in if you're not by electricity and you can't plug your camera in. Down here is a 1/4 20 screw that you would attach the camera to a tripod if you had one.